In 1987, she began living alone, but she didn't abandon what she knew. Every morning at 5 a.m., a pot still went on the stove. For generations, cooking wasn't just about food. It was survival, culture, and memory. Techniques were never written down. They lived in hands, in smell, in instinct. A slight tilt of the lid, the timing of the flame. These were lessons passed quietly from one generation to the next. Then came convenience, processed meals, shortcuts, and the idea that faster is better. What we called progress slowly replaced tradition. But what she practices each day is history in motion, a form of knowledge that once fed large families with almost nothing, yet carried dignity, nutrition, and care. This is not just about her pot. It's about a system of living we are forgetting. And it didn't disappear by accident. Number 25, oxtail stew. The butcher gave it away. In black neighborhoods across Birmingham and Atlanta in the 1930s, oxtail was the cut nobody wanted, bony, strange, requiring hours before it gave anything back. Into the pot with whatever root vegetables were in the house, an onion blackened in the dry pot first, everything covered with water, and left 4 hours. The bones gave up collagen, marrow, gelatin. The broth went nearly black and coated your spoon and your lip like something you'd needed without knowing. 5 cents a pound in 1935. Today it costs $18 a pound. The people who invented this meal saw none of that. That is not progress. That is the oldest theft there is. Number 24, bean soup with ham hock. The ham hock cost a dime. It was the part of the pig nobody else wanted, knuckle and skin and a thin collar of dark meat, and the butcher would sell you one for whatever was in your pocket. Into the pot with a pound of dried navy beans soaked overnight, enough water to cover twice, a chopped onion, black pepper. 4 hours. The smell moved from room to room. The broth went thick and amber. The meat fell from the bone in dark, silky threads. 6 cents total. 3 full days of hot meals. Today they call it artisan white bean soup and charge $14 a bowl in a restaurant with exposed brick walls. The recipe hasn't changed. The contempt for the people who invented it has. Number 23. Fried cornmeal mush. You made it the night before. Cornmeal stirred into boiling salted water until heavy and slow-moving. Poured into a loaf pan, left overnight to go cold and solid. In the morning, sliced half an inch thick, laid into a cast-iron skillet with lard already shimmering, fried until the outside went crisp and dark gold and the inside stayed soft and faintly sweet. 2 cents in 1920s Ohio. Breakfast for a family of 5. They do this in Brooklyn now. They call it polenta frita. They charge $16. Grandma called it breakfast, and she was right. Number 22. Salmon patties in cream gravy. 1 can of pink salmon, crushed crackers, 1 egg, formed into rounds, pressed flat, fried in bacon drippings until a dark crust held everything together. Cream gravy from the same skillet flour, drippings, milk, poured over the top. 10 cents for the can in the 1940s. What the food industry doesn't want you to know. That canned pink salmon was wild-caught Pacific fish, higher in omega, 3 seconds than most fresh fish sold in supermarkets today. They fed their families better than we feed ours. Number 21. Tomato gravy over biscuits. August, when the garden came in. Tomatoes peeled and dropped into the pot with bacon drippings, a rough chopped onion, a pinch of sugar to cut the acid. Cooked down slow until dark red and thick. Poured over yesterday's biscuits, gone slightly hard at the edges better that way because they held up under the gravy. 3 cents a serving. Free from the garden. Food magazines discovered this in 2019. They called it rustic tomato pan sauce. They called it shakshuka adjacent. That is not the same thing. That is not even close to the same thing. Number 20. Milk toast. A piece of stale bread toasted in a dry pan, dropped into a bowl and covered with hot milk, heated until it steamed, but never boiled with a pinch of salt. and sometimes a small knob of butter melting slow across the surface. 4 cents in 1934. Calcium, fat, and enough warmth to get a person through a winter night with no central heating. The food magazines called it invalid food. She never apologized for it. On the nights she made it, nobody at that table felt poor. Number 19, potato soup with bacon. 4 ingredients: potatoes, onion, bacon drippings, water, diced rough, cooked until completely soft, some mashed against the side of the pot to thicken the broth. Salt, more pepper than seemed wise. 4 cents a pot, 2 days of meals. The Irish carried this across the Atlantic in the 1840s, and it never left. They knew things about potatoes that we'll spend 50 years trying to remember. A potato with its skin on is a complete food. Calories, potassium, vitamin C, fiber in the skin, which they never threw away. Number 18, dried pea soup. The bag of split peas cost 3 cents. A ham bone from last Sunday had been waiting in the icebox for exactly this moment. Everything into the pot, covered with cold water, brought up slow. The split peas, dissolved as they cooked, you didn't need to do anything, into a thick, khaki soup, slightly sweet from the peas, smoky from the bone. A cup of cooked split peas delivers 18 grams of protein. 18 grams. From a food that cost 3 cents a pound and sat on the shelf for 2 years without spoiling. The supplement industry sells you the same protein in powder for $42 a bag. She was right. Everything she knew was right. Number 17, chicken and rice, Depression style. One old chicken tough. A laying hen passed her useful years into the pothole with cold water, half an onion, an herb from near the back door. 2 hours, meat falling from the bone. Lift the bird out, pull every thread of meat with your fingers, return the bones for another hour, strain the broth, cook rice directly in that liquid. 8 cents for the whole bird in 1930s Georgia. 3 days of meals. Nothing wasted, not the neck, not the feet, not one grain of rice stuck to the side of the pot. This was not poor food. This was a complete culinary philosophy. Number 16, chili con carne. From the 1880s through the early 1900s, Mexican women set up open-air stalls in San Antonio's plaza at night, selling chili for 5 cents. They were called the Chili Queens. They cooked over open fires, dried chiles, toasted and ground by hand, beef braised until it shredded, cumin and garlic and lard and thyme. The city shut them down in 1943. Sanitation was the official reason. The real reason was the same as it always is. What those women made was one of the foundational foods of this country. Their knowledge was absorbed into a corporate product and sold in a can for 30 years. The original chili peppers contained capsaicin, now proven to reduce inflammation and support cardiovascular function. They were cooking medicine. We lost the original when we canned the imitation. Number 15, navy bean and salt pork. The United States Navy fed sailors this for 200 years. Dried navy beans, a piece of salt pork, water. It kept men alive at sea for months without refrigeration or a supply chain. On land, this appeared every Saturday in the fishing villages of coastal Maine. Beans soaked Friday night, put on before church, left all day over the lowest possible flame. 4 cents a serving. A complete protein, shelf-stable for years. In 1952, Van Camps and Campbell's ran coordinated marketing campaigns positioning homemade beans as poverty and backwardness. By 1960, the housewife who still made beans from scratch was made to feel she was behind. That is not progress. That is a company deciding your grandmother's Saturday ritual was an obstacle to their profit margin. Number 14, crackling bread. When you rendered pork fat, and you always rendered pork fat, the crisp pieces of skin that remained were cracklings. Salty, dense, brittle. You crumbled them into cornbread batter and poured it into a cast-iron skillet hot with lard already smoking. 20 minutes. Dark crackling crust on the bottom, tender, smoky interior. 2 cents in the 1930s Ozarks. A bakery in Nashville sells artisan pork crackling cornbread for $9 a slice. They call it a heritage recipe. It is. It just wasn't theirs to take. Number 13. Mulligan stew. There was no recipe. Along the freight lines in the 1930s, men who had lost everything gathered in camps near the rails. One pot, one fire, whatever anyone had. A potato, a carrot pulled from a field 2 miles back, a tin of sardines, a bone from this morning, everything in. Water covered it. The man who tended the fire, who watched the pot, kept the flame even, knew when it was ready, was respected. He had a skill. He was feeding people. There was dignity in that pot. A kind of intelligence that has nothing to do with recipes and everything to do with understanding what food is actually for. Number 12. American goulash. Ground beef browned with onion until dark. A can of tomatoes. Elbow macaroni cooked directly in the liquid so it absorbed the fat and acid and became something unified. A shake of paprika. Salt. Pepper. 1 pot. 30 minutes. 8 cents. 2 days of meals. Hungarian immigrants brought goulash to the steel towns of Pittsburgh and Cleveland, and by the Depression the celebration was over, but the philosophy survived. Today's menus list pasta bolognese for $22. It is a dressed-up cousin of this meal, wearing a different name and a price tag designed to make you forget where it came from. Number 11. Liver and onions. Beef liver was the cheapest cut at any butcher for most of the 20th century, 3 cents a pound. Onions sliced thick, cooked slow in drippings until deeply golden and sweet. Liver dredged in flour, laid into the same pan, 2 minutes aside, seared dark outside, still faintly pink inside. Beef liver from grass-fed cattle contains more vitamin A, B12, iron, copper, and folate per ounce than any other food that has ever existed. In the 1970s, the processed food industry ran campaigns positioning liver as old-fashioned and unpleasant. By 1985, liver consumption had dropped 60%. Then they sold you B12 supplements, iron tablets, folate capsules. That is not progress. That is a business model. Number 10. Pinto beans and cornbread. In the mountains of eastern Kentucky, this was not a side dish. It was the meal. The whole, complete, deliberate meal. Pintos cooked low and long with salt pork and onion, enough water to stay covered. 3-4 hours. The broth went thick and brownish red. The cornbread, baked in the same oven, came out hot, eaten by tearing pieces and dragging them through the bean broth. 3 cents in 1933. What the women of Appalachian Kentucky understood without a single nutrition class: protein complementarity. Beans and cornmeal together deliver a complete amino acid profile that neither provides alone. They figured that out 60 years before scientists named it because their children were alive and healthy on 3 cents a day, and that told them everything. Number 9. Salt fish and potatoes. The fish had been salted and dried for months. You soaked it overnight, changing the water twice. By morning it had softened back toward what it had been. Boiled with quartered potatoes, skin on, in fresh water. Drained, dressed with rendered salt pork fat, and the crispy bits scattered over the top. 3 cents a serving. A family threw a New England winter on 1 salted fish and a root cellar of potatoes. The cod fishery collapsed in 1992 after decades of industrial trawling. But the knowledge of preservation, of feeding a family through cold darkness on almost nothing, had already vanished from American kitchens 20 years before the fish did. Number 8. Rice and gravy. A bowl of rice and gravy in a Louisiana sharecropper's kitchen in 1937 was not a side dish. Say that again. It was the full, complete, deliberate meal. You started with the drippings. Flour worked in slowly until the roux went the color of red clay. Then, water or stock if you had it poured in until it seized and relaxed into a thick, dark, satiny gravy. Poured over white rice with every grain distinct. 3 cents in the Mississippi Delta. 1 pot. 20 minutes. They knew things about fat and flour and heat and patience that we will spend 50 years trying to remember. Number 7. Poor man's onion soup. French-Canadian mill workers in Lowell and Detroit in the 1920s made a soup so simple it seemed like nothing. Onions, sliced thin, cooked low in whatever fat was available for 45 minutes until every strand was golden and sweet. Then water, just water, salt, pepper, a bay leaf, a piece of stale bread dropped into the bowl to thicken from the bottom. No Gruyere, no broiled crust, no crock. Those things came later, in the restaurant version, when the soup left the working class and acquired a price tag. 3 cents a bowl in 1935. The knowledge of what an onion becomes with patience and low heat is worth more than the soup that contains it. Number 6. Cowboy beans. The chuck wagon cook never emptied the pot. Across the cattle trails from the 1880s forward, the bean pot was a living thing. Dried pintos, water, salt pork, dried chile. You cooked it, ate from it, added more beans and water when it ran low. Never empty, continuously evolving. 4 cents a pot in 1890. Not a pot of food, a pot of accumulated time. Here is what the modern meal kit industry can never sell you. Continuity. The knowledge that today's meal is better because of last week's, that the pot has memory, that food is not a single event but an ongoing relationship between cook, heat, ingredients, and days. Number 5. Stuffed cabbage. On Sundays in the Polish and Ukrainian neighborhoods of Pittsburgh and Chicago, the smell started in the morning. Cabbage softened whole in the pot, leaves peeled back into vessels, rice and ground meat placed at the base, rolled and packed into the pot, covered with tomato and sauerkraut, braised 2 hours. A cabbage cost 1 cent in 1932, 6 cents total for the pot, one person fed for a week. By Thursday, the flavor had deepened. By Friday, the sauerkraut had mellowed, and the rice had absorbed everything. Every culture had a version. Greek dolmades, Jewish holishkes, Arab warak dawali. The specific ingredient changed. The wisdom was the same. Take the cheapest leaf, fill it with the least amount of meat. Let time and acid do what money cannot. Number 4. Dandelion greens and fatback. The food was free. Every spring in Italian immigrant neighborhoods in Newark and Philadelphia, women went out with paper bags and picked dandelion greens from the edges of yards, young ones, before they flowered, tender and just bitter enough. Brought home, washed, wilted in a pan with fatback, the fat rendering slow, the greens collapsing into it and going silky and dark. Eaten with bread to mop the pot. 0 cents. Dandelion greens contain more calcium per cup than milk, more iron per serving than spinach, more beta-carotene than carrots. By 1965, the herbicide industry had made dandelions the enemy. The free food became the thing you sprayed. Then the same nutrient was sold back in supplement bottles. That is not progress. That is the destruction of a free food supply to sell you a chemical. Number 3. Cornmeal porridge. This is the oldest American meal. Before the Depression, before the Civil War, before the Republic itself, cornmeal stirred into boiling salted water with salt, cooked until thick. The Pilgrims ate it because the Wampanoag showed them how. Hasty pudding in New England, mush in the Midwest, grits in the South, atoll in the Southwest. 300 years, 1 pot, 2 cents a serving. In 1906, Post and Kellogg began selling boxed breakfast cereal. By the 1950s, $50 million in advertising had made the morning porridge seem old-fashioned and rural. One of the cleanest corporate erasures in American food history. 300 years of nutritional knowledge dissolved in 30 years of marketing. Grandma just called it breakfast. It was the right breakfast. It had always been the right breakfast. Number 2. Bone broth soup. The butcher gave the bones away. Knuckles, femurs, neck bones, marrow bones, the structural remnants after the valuable cuts had been sold. You asked, and he wrapped them in paper. Sometimes a penny, sometimes just handed across. You roasted them first until the marrow bubbled and the edges went brown. Into the pot with cold water, a halved onion, a splash of vinegar to pull minerals from the bone, whatever vegetable scraps sat by the stove. 8 hours, sometimes 12. What came out was darker than broth, coating the back of a spoon, thick with collagen, mineral, gelatin, marrow. 1 cent per pot. Bones were free. The wellness industry discovered bone broth in 2014. They put it in cartons, gave it a logo, charged $9 at Whole Foods and called it a superfood. She made it every week for free, without a label, without a brand, without needing anyone to tell her it was good for her, because she could see it in the faces of the people she fed. Number 1. Stone soup. This one has no recipe. It never did. That is the point. In the mining camps of West Virginia, the tenant farms of Mississippi, the tenement blocks of New York's Lower East Side, and the drought-stricken plains of Oklahoma, there was a practice older than America of the community pot. 1 pot, the biggest one anyone owned. Set over a fire in a yard, a lot, a camp, and everyone who had anything brought it. A potato, a handful of dried beans, a piece of salt pork, a turnip, a jar of preserved tomatoes. Into the pot it all went. The pot fed everyone. Nobody who came to the fire hungry was turned away. The food industry cannot sell you this. There is no package for it, no brand, no version of community that comes in a box with a barcode. What they sold instead was the individual meal, the single-serve container. The idea that cooking for yourself, alone, was a problem to be managed rather than a practice to be honored. They gave you the microwave meal and called it convenience, and charged $4 for something that would have cost 4 cents if you'd kept the pot going. This was not convenience. This was isolation dressed up in packaging. The pot in the middle of the fire fed everyone. It always had, it always will. Closing. So here is what we know. Bone broth from free bones. Pinto beans and cornbread at 3 cents a serving, delivering complete protein every time. Dandelion greens from the yard, more calcium than a glass of milk, wilted in fatback. Pea soup for 3 cents, that delivers 18 grams of protein per bowl. The women who made these meals were not making do. They were not surviving. They were practicing one of the highest forms of human intelligence there is. They knew what food was for. They knew what the pot contained. They knew that nothing worth eating comes fast, and nothing worth knowing comes from a package. The food industry spent 70 years and hundreds of millions of dollars convincing this country that those women were behind the times, that their kitchens were primitive, that their meals were something a modern person should be embarrassed to eat. They won, for a while. The pot is still there. The knowledge is still there in the hands of women in their 70s and 80s who never stopped, who kept the flame low and the pot going and the bones in the water and the beans on the shelf. 1 pot this week. Just 1. Bring back one of these. Make it the way she made it, low heat, no shortcuts, no package. Taste what she knew. And then come down to the comments and tell me which one your grandmother made. Tell me her name. Tell me what it smelled like in her kitchen. She deserves to be remembered.